From sus to rizz, parents of Gen Alpha kids try to keep up with slang. So we're just gonna keep on acting like Gen Alpha or Gen Z slang isn't African American English? Bet, goat, sus, cap, and other words in that article can all be traced back to Black English, which has been around for a long, long while. And yet, because there's this constant need to rebrand AAE as the language of the youth, the white youth specifically, you wouldn't know it. Social media has effectively repackaged a Black dialect as new and trendy slang. But why is it then that AAE is still seen as inferior when coming out of Black mouths? Really, how is it that one of the most disrespected English dialects is also one of its most copied? Let's talk about it. With the rise of social media, new words are constantly being added to internet culture, and very fast. The online world moves 10, 20, 30 times faster, and subsequently, it's always on the prowl for new any and everything. And because American pop culture, dare I say pop culture globally, has always been driven by Black fashion, music, and behaviors, it's not surprising really that that would extend to language as well. Really, Black expressions have been co-opted by mainstream American culture for decades.
I know they don't mean any harm, but they don't realize how ignorant it is when trying to have that Black voice that some whites try to do that really don't do well.
Like, why you jive turkey?
And today, Black English expressions like "it's giving" or "slay" take social media by storm and are adopted by various communities who then, intentionally or not, misuse and misappropriate them.
Oh my god, period sis gonna finna. Excuse me? Good sis whole ass ate that up, period poo dead ass finna love. Huh? Dead ass chapped baby girl drowning in these edges, cuz.
I mean, up till not too long ago, the word child, which is the shortened version of child, was pronounced chile by folks who weren't really in the know and didn't quite understand the words they had seen in passing in Black spaces. And because the internet continuously exposes the masses to Black lingo, often without the Black body, many assume that it's all new. But this recency illusion, a term coined by linguist Arnold Zwicky to describe the belief that something is new just because it's new to you, can be quite damaging because it erases Black voices and contributions. AAE is a living language that has evolved over centuries, and just like with any other language or dialect, it has its own set of rules. Thinking that AAE speakers are lazy or even calling AAE Black slang is incredibly reductive. See, African American English, formerly known as ebonics, we'll get to that later, and now known as African American Vernacular English, African American Language, or Black English, has been actively used in Black communities for generations. Matter of fact, it's estimated that AAE is spoken by about 80% of Black Americans today. There are several theories as to how it came about, but they all start with the beginning of slavery in colonial America. See, the transatlantic slave trade forcefully grouped more than 45 distinct African ethnic groups together, and they had to find ways to communicate with each other because communication meant survival. Some linguists believe that AAE originated from a mix of Creole languages, others believe that it evolved from contact between English and West African grammar systems, and several believe that it grew out of the English spoken by white rural Southerners of the time. But really, whatever AAE's beginnings, what's for sure is that it became a way for the enslaved to form community outside of their shared trauma. Racial segregation in the South also pushed the development and divergence of AAE from standard American English. And when millions of Black Americans fled racial persecution in the 20th century and moved north in what is now known as the Great Migration, they brought their language with them, and through time, each region created slightly different variations of it. And that regional variation is important to note because non-Black folks never seem to realize that when they put on a Black accent or vocal blackface, they're effectively painting Blackness as a monolith. Just like there isn't one African accent, there isn't a universal Black one either. As with other languages, accents or words may differ from region to region.
I done grew up here all my life, you feel what I'm saying? Like,
shout out Lil Mac, my cousin. Y'all probably know him, Demo.
But you know, it was Black Johnson from up top of the hill right here.
But no matter the phonetic variation that may arise depending on where you're from, AAE as a whole is governed by its own rules of grammar and pronunciation, as I mentioned earlier. For example, the use of double negatives, the removal of the verbal copula, and the lack of stem change in the third person singular of verbs are all grammatical features of AAE. And I'd like to point out before anyone says, yeah, but you can't do that. No other language language does that. Well, yes, other languages do. Spanish, for example, also uses the double negative, and Japanese employs the zero copula. Language isn't like math. There's fluidity within the rules. So all these characteristics and more separate AAE from standard American English, and at times can even provide more emphasis and precision than mainstream English. Celebrated Black writers and novelists like Langston Hughes and Toni Morrison, respectively, have drawn extensively from Black English, and James Baldwin even called it this passion, this skill, this incredible music. And yet, despite all this, AAE was and still is a source of discrimination. It has literally been the subject of high-profile court cases, like the 1996 Oakland resolution, where the Oakland School Board faced a ton of backlash for announcing that ebonics was the primary language of its primarily Black students. And yes, I said ebonics because at the time, AAE was called ebonics, a portmanteau of ebony and phonics. Coined in the 1970s by Black psychologist Robert Williams, the term ebonics was a way to get the white establishment to stop calling it lazy or broken English. Sadly, that didn't work, and ebonics was co-opted by white speakers as a derogatory term, something we've seen recently with words like cancelled or woke. Not to mention that the media storm that followed the Oakland resolution only added to its negative connotations, and now ebonics isn't used by language researchers anymore. So you've got this incredibly expressive and creative Black language being linguistically profiled and discriminated against in all spheres of society, from education to employment, and yet we somehow get to a point where everybody seemingly speaks it online. How? Well, the rise of the internet completely changed the way we connect with each other. Communities that wouldn't necessarily interact with one another now have digital access to each other, and this dissemination of culture leads to broader adoption, for better or worse. Social media can simultaneously oppress and empower the marginalized, and in this case, it's propagated Black speech without the Black body, and because it's cast out the Black body, you get non-Black folks fumbling through established syntax and speaking in a way they don't fully understand.
When I said I finna be in the pit, that like just came out.
Do
and
you
I was
say finna on the reg?
Not really. I used to when I was like a teenager, like when,
Yeah.
I don't know, but like I don't ever say it now. It just came out, and I
just
didn't
came
think
out.
twice about it.
I mean, there's a whole Twitter page about it. That's on Finn Clockett? Okay, Asa. It's also given rise to that pesky Black accent I talked about earlier.
Don't play with that girl because she is not one of them. Yeah, fuck you talking about.
Historically, white people haven't had to code switch for better opportunities or survival. So when they do around Black folks, it feels very much like modern day minstrelsy, to me at least.
Period.
And I'm not necessarily talking about non-Black folks who use AAE because they grew up with or around it. I'm talking about non-Black people coming across it online and using it without grasping its structure or meaning. And I'm also talking about the non-Blacks who use it to create and decorate their personality. In an ideal world, we'd simply chalk it all up to cultural exchange, but this isn't an ideal world. This is reality, and in this reality, we have to contend with the history of oppression that comes from speaking a certain way when you look a certain way. The line between cultural exchange and cultural appropriation is very thin, and in this case, it will always have sinister undertones because the people the language is being pulled from are still being marginalized and maligned for speaking in a way they invented. It's why Black folks are negatively stereotyped whenever they speak AAE, while non-Black folks are able to profit off of it and skirt that ghetto label.
I be trending. That's crazy. Yeah. Do I be trending? It was a long ass time ago, girl. We've been.
Matter of fact, AAE has been used by countless non-Black creators for clout, and that in turn has stripped it of its context and turned it into a tool of amusement. And it's doubly infuriating knowing that non-Black folks who use it as a costume online don't face the same real-world consequences Black folks do for speaking in a tongue, again, their ancestors crafted out of resistance. It's why celebrities like Ariana Grande or Aquafina can slip in and out of their Black sense without facing much pushback or tangible consequences. It's also why AAE has now been co-opted every which way and had its creators cast out. Black culture embodies coolness, it always has, but society has always wanted the cool without the person. And you can trust me on this, I mean, I've made countless videos about it, from acrylic nails to baby hairs. So that's how you get companies misusing AAE to appeal to the youth, and articles written about Gen Z or Gen Alpha slang which completely erase the very Black origin of said slang. It's also how you get SNL skits like Gen Z Hospital that are meant to poke fun at how young people speak, but in actuality completely strip the importance of AAE.
Yo, is
This doctor keeps leaving us on red. He's gonna catch hands on gang.
Kiki or tea are not Gen Z words. They're derived from AAE and were in fact born at the intersection of blackness and queerness. For example, words like slay and work originated from Black drag culture and were in many cases used as self-affirming phrases in a society that, well, denied their existence. The apparatus of cultural appropriation assumes that what it appropriates from is monolithic, and in turn, it completely dilutes its history and authenticity. AAE has effectively been gentrified, but despite it being one of the most culturally impactful forms of English that exists today, Black people still face discrimination for not following proper English rules. I mean, just in the article I read from at the beginning of this video, one of the parents says, quote, "It's fine to use that kind of phrasing and terminology with your friends, but not your teachers, not in serious situations." Okay, so when I went back to get a second screenshot of the article, I realized that it had been updated, and there was an editor's note stating that the article had been updated to reflect and better explain the origins of slang used by members of Generation Alpha. I think there was a lot of pushback to the article on Twitter, now X, and rightfully so. I mean, even the picture that they used on Twitter changed, and it's no longer just a white family, you know, being the face of this very Black language. So yeah, just wanted to note that. Reducing AAE to internet slang has basically removed all the seriousness of the language and its very established rules, and I don't know that it's gonna stop anytime soon. Today's slang is tomorrow's language, and if we haven't already, we might really get to a point where it will no longer be associated with Black folks in any way, shape, or form. And it's sad, really, because we know when certain words are of French origin, like déjà vu, for example, but the same historical courtesy can't be extended for Black English. Now, I understand that historical and cultural context isn't something most people think about whenever they use AAE, and it would be unfair to ask that everybody do, but when you've got a multitude of articles, posts, and whatnot painting it as Gen Z slang, it effectively contributes to the erasure of its Black beginnings, even though AAE has sizably shifted mainstream culture. Really, it kind of goes back to the fact that we can't have anything nice because anti-Blackness permeates so many aspects of our society. The ever-growing use of AAE on social media doesn't even have to be a bad thing, but there's just this unwritten refusal to approach it with care or understanding, which is also probably why language appropriation is quite hard to control. It's not as tangible as the physical appropriation of, say, clothes or hairstyles. But I will say this, the beauty of African American English lies in both its creativity and resilience. For many Black Americans, it's a cultural marker of shared history and identity, a cultural heirloom. And that's why it'll continue to thrive within Black communities, because, well, they're the ones responsible for its creation, adoration, and evolution. As social cultural linguist Dr. Jamal Mawakil said, "There will never be a way to stop being the creative force that's always been a part of Black language and culture."